civil society collective met with President Cyril Ramaphosa, Minister of Social Development Lindiwe Zulu and Minister of Finance Enoch Godongwana to discuss requests by the Institute for Economic Justice, Black Sash Studies and Poverty and Inequality Institute, as well as #PayTheGrant and Amandla.mobi to discuss a proposal for the extension and improvement of the R350 Covid-19 Social Relief Distress Grant beyond the deadline of March 2022 and possible policy pathways to the introduction of a basic income grant. For more on this, we're joined on the line by researcher at the Institute for Economic Justice, Zimbali Mncube. Zimbali, thank you so much for your time and thank you for joining us. You had those discussions with the President. What kind of an undertaking did you need to hear from the President to allay any fears of, for starters, the scrapping of the COVID-19 Social Relief Distress Grant and the scrapping of the Basic Income Grant?
Thank you for having me, Ntokozo. Well, we met with the President as civil society really to set forth our proposals on what we think is a necessary and urgent state intervention into saving livelihoods. We know that the SRD has provided a lifeline for 10.3 million citizens, and so in March, it's about to expire, so we really presented proposals to the President to consider extending and improving the social relief grant of distress, but also committing to a basic income support in the medium term.
Zimbali, what were some of the suggestions or pointers you were able to put across to the President in your proposals arguing for an extension of the SRD grant?
Yeah, well, I mean, the context as we know it, we are in a context of massive hunger. The unemployment rate is skyrocketing, especially for youth and Black women. And so it was really about bringing to life that context that the majority of South Africans and people in the country are facing. But also we were discussing a pathway towards a universal basic income guarantee. And the key proposals here, firstly, it was improving the SRD grant to at least the food poverty line of 624, and then in the long term looking towards implementing a basic income guarantee for all citizens really. And we looked at evidence, international evidence and local evidence. We know that an experts panel that was supported by the International Labour Organization and the Department of Social Development recommended the implementation of an SRD. And so this is what was taken into account when we went to this meeting with the President. And a number of civil society organizations have put forth financing proposals of how the basic income guarantee could be financed. And so we also looked at these measures. We looked at three pathways in particular. I'm just going to go through them now. The first one is to improve the SRD at 624, which is the food poverty line. And then in the medium term, introduced a means testing at a lower bound poverty line. And then in the long term, we can then phase in the universal basic income guarantee. The second pathway is to improve the SRD as well at the food poverty line from March 2022 onwards. And then by January 2023, we look at a grant at the food poverty line for all that fall below an income of, for instance, 4,600, using the child support grant income threshold, or you could use an income tax of about 7,000. We also look at the third pathway, which is to improve the SRD, the current SRD grant to 624, but also looking towards using the means test of the upper bound poverty line, as well as looking towards universalizing the grant. So not really targeting those who are unemployed, but covering everyone who is in society.
Zimbali, I'm curious, I wish I was a fly on the wall in that conversation, but I'm curious about the responses that you received after making your proposals, because if I'm not mistaken, you essentially went in there and asked for the SRD grant to be increased from the current 350 rands, a threshold, up to about 624, but on top of that also pushed harder for that basic income grant to be implemented. What sort of a response did you get at essentially asking the government to pay more money?
Well, as you know, Ntokozo, this issue has been an ongoing issue. We raised it towards the medium-term budget policy statement in November, and the responses from the state was really that was not a place to raise that issue, and it is a consideration that would be raised in February. We are now in February, and really from the meeting, there was a positive sentiment, but not really clear commitment from the president to say that they are looking towards alternatives or means to implement this basic income support. And so what we proposed, the recommendations that we put forth was that we need to look at calling a presidential expert panel that will be appointed to review the current existing evidence and look at how best can really this UBIC be implemented in South Africa. Because we acknowledge that the DSD and the ILO expert panel has already done significant work. However, it's a departmental sort of exercise. But right now what we need is something that is supported by the president and the state. And then we can look towards what financing proposal would work best in the long term.
As you've mentioned, Zimbali, these are conversations that you have been having as a collective with the government for a long time now. I think the COVID-19 pandemic and the devastation that was caused by the pandemic certainly has given the impetus needed to get government going. But a report yesterday mentioned how government is in fact in talks with the World Bank to secure additional funding for the likely extension of the COVID-19 SRD grant, which is what we've been talking about, which, as we know, is scheduled to expire in March. Nothing around, introducing a basic income grant. Do you get the sense that the government is kicking the can further down the road and not really getting serious about a basic income grant and allowing the continued extension of the SRD grant as a way to sort of, kind of allay any sort of concerns or fears from the likes of your civil society collective?
Yeah, I think that's a really important issue, because currently the SRD is being implemented under the regulatory powers of the national state of disaster. And so it's really in a precarious position, hence the continuous extensions. The point that you're raising is really important. And we are really calling for now permanent social support to be integrated into the social assistance framework. And so that will ensure that we don't see continuous episodes of whether we don't know whether the grant is being extended or it's being terminated, because that puts a lot of stress on people that rely on this grant to secure their next meal, to seek job opportunities, to invest into their micro enterprises. And so this is really what civil society is calling for, a long-term solution to dire situations, a humanitarian crisis really, which is inhibiting the rights of the majority of people in this country.
I mean, while you've made a great argument on how the basic income grant can go a long way in eradicating, or at least helping to eradicate poverty, unemployment, etc., organizations like yourself have really done quite a bit to ensure that you support the call for a basic income grant. In equal force, though, we've had some hold an opposing view. What do you say to sectors who argue that an income grant will have some unintended consequences, or that South Africa simply cannot afford such a measure?
I think it's really about understanding the situation on the ground, as you've mentioned, but also being innovative in the manner that we finance such a proposal. I mean, we've proposed a number of financing options on the table, and it's really up to the state to undertake the exercise to see which one would work best, you know. And of course, this would be done in conjunction with civil society and other stakeholders. But really, we could look at, for instance, the wealth tax. We know that there is increasing inequality in South Africa. And so the option of a wealth tax or introducing a social security tax could be something that can be explored to really finance this mechanism. And the argument that there is no money is sometimes a lazy argument, and it's also used to fearmonger people into, you know, not really considering what could be done to finance this mechanism, but also what could be done, but also what could be done to save the livelihoods of people that are hungry on the ground.
Well, thank you very much, Zimbali. We are going to have to leave that conversation there. That's Zimbali Mncube, who's a researcher at the Institute for Economic Justice, helping us to unpack that meeting that the Civil Society Collective had with President Cyril Ramaphosa on the basic income grant. Up next, though, the city of Cape Town says it has made about 800 million rands in domestic tourism this past festive season alone.